This week I'm hoping to finish the stone and earth shifting work that we started last week, but I'm not as confident as I'd like to be that this is actually going to happen. And having originally planned to have a bit of a break before the building team were back on site for their next bit of work, I'm now going to need to be here across this week. So I've had to rethink my plans a bit and reschedule some tasks, some of which are going to be dependent upon the arrival of some materials that I ordered at the end of last week. So I was very pleased when I arrived on Monday morning to find the delivery truck already dropping off the materials over the fence, a couple of hours earlier than they had suggested. And after a quick check of the delivery, I opened up and started the work I had planned. One of the bits of work that I now want to do this week that I had been saving for a rainy day is some more work on this wall, where you may recall during the first phase of roof work, we did some work chipping out this area which had been exposed bedrock, and I had then done the work at refilling it in with stones, which wasn't a terrible effort, but the truth is it wasn't a very good effort either. And I had been intending to do some improvement work on it, and I think now is a good time for that. And the reason the improvements are needed are that when I did the work, I lined it up on this bottom section of the wall, but I didn't do enough checks to make sure that this section was lined up with all the rest of the stones. And as a result of that, it's got a bit of a bulge here, which the builders gave me a lot of stick for. And it's one of those things that have been annoying me a lot. And while it feels a little bit painful to redo it, hopefully I'll do a better job now and I'll never be reminded of what a terrible job I did the first time around. After getting the generator set up, I could start my efforts at removing the stones I wanted to reorganize. But after 40 minutes, I hadn't made much of a dent and I needed a bit of a break and a re-energizing coffee. Back on the wall, I started to make slightly better progress when more stones had less mortar around them, and I was able to chisel and lever them out. But with the mortar being harder to chip out than I had anticipated, I realized that the removal part of the work was going to take much longer than I had expected. By lunchtime, I was a bit happier with my progress, but at times I had started to question my decision to repeat this wall work. For a bit of extra time in the sun, I collected some more stones of appropriate shapes and sizes. One of the reasons I needed to collect more stones was that quite a few of the existing stones were breaking as I prized them out, and I also wanted some smaller, less wide stones, as the size and width of the previous stones had contributed to the poor results and the bulge of my original work. Towards the base of the wall, the depth of the stones and mortar was a bit bigger, and all the work was proving a little tiring, whether chipping out with the power hammer or breaking stones free with a chisel and hammer. After my rest and stretch, I returned to the wall for a big final push. And having cleared the last of the stones that I wanted to take out, I finished up for the day. Day 2 was a beautiful, warm, sunny morning. By the time I was ready to start making some mortar, it was already t-shirt weather. With the mortar almost ready, I headed back for some final prep on the wall. Including a quick check and reminder of the wall angles that I would need to work with. Then the mortar was ready and I got started on the rebuilding work. By mid-morning, I started my second mortar mix of the day. Had a bit of a break in the sun. Then I was back to the wall, where I was lining up a row of stones at a time to help maintain consistent angles and to help make sure the stones that I had would fit together okay. Once I got into a good rhythm, I found myself very absorbed in the work, and a couple of times I simply forgot that the camera was running. And here is a sped up version of one of those times to give a slightly better idea of the actual process and the reality of the work and the amount of moving about I was doing. After finishing the work to a certain level, I needed a bit of a break outside and I needed to find some more appropriate stones. Once I had run out of mortar, it was time for some more mixing and a break for a slightly late lunch. Finishing with a visit to the outside stone pile for any better stone options. Back on the wall, I would keep going until the last mortar was used up. Before cleaning up for the day. Clearing some of the mortar joints. and then heading out. At the start of the week, it had been possible that Luis might be able to start on the Wednesday, but having not had any update the day before, I figured that I was going to have more time for the wall work. To start with, I needed to refill the water stores. And I needed to collect some more stones. And while searching the main rock pile, the building team's boss arrived to discuss plans for upcoming work. After a fairly long chat, I returned to the water filling and stones collecting. With the generator noise now joined by machines being used by gardeners tidying up the church before the Easter service. While starting up a new mortar mix, I had time for a quick coffee. Then, after some final mixing, the mortar was ready, and I could restart some wall work inside. With the church gardener pausing briefly, there's a little less noise, and I can give a quick explanation of what I'm going to do today. I'm reasonably happy with the work from yesterday, but there is this quite obvious line where the stones angle above what used to be the bedrock and where the newly positioned stones meet that. It looks a bit awkward, so I'm going to do some work at trying to merge these two different sections a bit better, and then I will work my way through here and maybe do a little bit of tidying up there, depending on how much time I have. To try and merge the different sections and to reduce the visibility of the angled line, I needed to take out some of the existing stones around the line or try to chip them into slightly different shapes, both of which I found much easier to do with the hammer and chisel rather than with the power hammer. After getting my rhythm back, I steadily worked my way up the line. During this walk, I did manage to get an update from Luis, who confirmed that he would definitely be back this week, either on Thursday or Friday. I had wanted to try and finish the filling in before lunch, but eventually my hunger got the better of me and I stopped for a late lunch. After which I was back to the wall. Although I was in a bit of a hurry as Laura and I had an important meeting scheduled later that afternoon. After a very quick tidy up and lock up, I headed out to join Laura for a meeting with a potential new housemate for Billy. Overnight, a different weather front had swept in and there was some seriously strong and cold wind in the air. Having not heard from Luis, I assumed he wouldn't be arriving that morning, so I got on with some mortar mixing to be able to do some more wall work, while trying to get hold of him on the phone. From the latest update with Luis, it looks like he is going to be here tomorrow, but you can never be that sure. But it does give me one more day to do some final tidying up on this wall, especially the old section in that top left-hand corner. I just want to give it a bit of a scrape and a clean and then see if there are any parts where I ought to put some new stones in. After a reasonably productive start to the day, I headed outside for some sun, wind and coffee. and headed to the top of the rock pile for perhaps the last time. Then I was back to the wall for some more stone and mortar cosmetics. My next break came courtesy of an unexpected visitor who had dropped in to say hello at the start of a big road trip he was doing around Spain. And after a chat in the sun and a quick tour of the house, I was back to the wall and the top of the angled line in the corner. With the line between the two sections now a lot less visible, I stopped for some lunch. Before heading back for some more stone replacing higher up the wall. With the last remaining mortar, I did a little bit of repointing. And then I got started on a final clean and tidy up session for the week to be ready for an 8 o'clock start the next morning. Overnight, Luis had asked if we could start at 7. And we both arrived about 15 minutes early. And while I opened up fully, Luis just piled straight into the work. First of all, moving the big, better stones from the main stone pile to the new pile outside the gate. The earlier start had at least enabled me to film another sunrise, although at the speed Luis was working at, I need to follow his work carefully to enjoy the changes he was making so quickly. With most of the bigger stones moved, Luis moved on to the next phase and the lifting of smaller stones and gravel onto the higher level, where I will be using them for leveling work later on. Although I've now seen it many times before, the speed that Luis works always impresses me, and his reversing down the ramp was fairly spectacular. And while I would prefer slightly more accurate scheduling, I still think his work, energy, and positive outlook are worth waiting for. With enough smaller stones lifted up a level, the next work was about adjusting the line of the bank in front and the level below it. Then it was time to take out the final remains of the old shed. And after 3 hours of pretty much non-stop shifting, it was time for a break, or at least a change in scene, as I now needed to drive Luis down the hill for a short meeting elsewhere before we headed back up the hill with a lunch stop en route. Back on site a couple of hours later, Luis hit the shifting hard again, clearing some of the old stone pile and adjusting various levels in front. times I couldn't help myself from jumping in to save some bigger, better stones that I had seen. And after the last clearing of the stone pile for now, Luis tidied and smoothed a few of the surfaces. And that is the end of work for this week, when once again things haven't quite gone to plan, and I've certainly spent a lot more time in this room than I had intended. But I am reasonably happy with my latest work on this wall, especially when I compare it to how it looked at the start of the week with its bulge, and also when I think about how it looks now compared to the various bits of work that we've done on it over the last year. There is quite a lot more repair work to do on the higher up parts, and we have got to repoint the whole of this surface, but that will all be a bit later on. But now I'm going to head outside into the Tramontana gale that is blowing big time, and try to talk a bit about today's earth shifting work, which, when it did eventually start, got going at a very good pace, starting off with moving some of the bigger stones from there to the big stone pile at the back, and then shifting this huge new pile of smaller stones and gravel up to this level, where later on we'll be using it for levelling out all of the space in front of the house. Luis then moved more rubble from this bank and more stones from the big pile into this corner, where the level needs to be about 1 metre higher, than all of the ground on this side, where the main stone pile has almost disappeared, although there is some more shifting still to do, both here and in a few other places, which we'll only be doing just before we start to put the various walls and structures in this area in front. But the next bit of work will actually be the second half of the roof, when the builders are back on site after Easter, as next week I'm going to be taking a bit of a break and catching up on a few things. But I will come back up to the house next week, and I'll probably record a question and answer session. So if you do have any questions, please do add them to the comments in this video, and then please do tune in again next week to hear the answers.